that. I love it. Okay, you are listening to Contesting Wrestling Premium. This is the premium complement to our Kenny Omega episode. Kenny Omega, who, as of right now, as of this stage in the podcast, is my fucking favorite wrestler, I think. At least in, like, maybe there's, like, a top echelon of guys who I like them all equally in different ways, but, like, Omega's definitely up there.
Well, he's seeking to change the world of wrestling, and he's already changed the world of wrestling in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. This is kind of the closest I've gotten to being like, oh, I'm a fan. The idea that Kenny Omega and Orange Cassidy might have a match with each other at some point on AEW is genuinely exciting to me. Like,
I'll keep you posted if that's gonna happen.
Yeah,
sure.
please do.
I think they're definitely the two wrestlers I'm most invested in AEW
Certainly.
at this point. I like Pac too.
Pac's very good. I'm glad that he's finally working for a company that understands how good he is and how to use him.
And then, of course, there's Jericho.
Well, AEW has a lot of good wrestlers, you know?
But today we're talking about Omega, a little bit about his earlier career, but mostly focusing on his relationship in pro wrestling with Kota Ibushi, the other half of the Golden Lovers. So the matches we're talking about today are, first of all, a triple threat match between Kenny Omega, Tyler Black, and the American Dragon Bryan Danielson from Ring of Honor Bound by Hate in 2008. That match was right around the time I think both you and I, Doc, we became aware of Omega for the first time.
Yeah. I think maybe it's either that or we saw him in Jersey All Pro Wrestling around the same time. He had started hitting up the American Indies on the East Coast a bit.
Yeah, he only had a few matches in Ring of Honor. I think he didn't quite fit with their style. We see here that he hasn't quite developed the poise, developed, the sort of main event style that he would have. I mean, this is mostly a showcase match for Bryan Danielson, who I think at the time they were building up to finally beat Takeshi Morishima. This was about a month before that last match that they had. So, Danielson just comes off as an absolute superhero in this match.
Yeah.
And to the point where the fans start chanting, "We are not worthy," pretty soon into it.
I remember how revered he was and how much we revered him at this point, you know? It was like, man, it's a shame they're never going to sign him and make him a big star. Which then they proceeded to do over the next 5 years, make him a bigger star than any of us could possibly have imagined.
Right. But this was, ROH was going through Canada at the time.
Mm-hmm.
This is in Markham, Ontario. And so they used Kenny Omega, who's still a local guy.
Yeah.
And we get a little glimmer of the great wrestler that Omega would become in this match.
Yeah, this match felt to me a lot like if you go see a band of 17-year-old prodigies or something where they can all do really cool, technical, interesting shit, but there's not really any songwriting or life experience informing the process or anything like that, because this was definitely really impressive to watch, and they're doing all this cool stuff, but I didn't feel like there was any sort of real narrative to it. I didn't really get
Yeah, well, we picked this match because of all three of the guys that are in it. Now Danielson was already like the guy there, but Omega and Tyler Black.
Did you recognize Tyler Black, by the way, Evan? Do you know who that is?
No.
That's an interesting point.
he was very much just the other guy there.
It really was. So
he looked like a lot of guys I've known in my life, so I don't know.
He would become Seth Rollins.
Really?
Yeah, that's that guy. That guy.
He was young in his Ring of Honor career at this point. He was still very much like an up-and-coming young dude that some people were starting to say, oh, this guy can do the moves well, and with over the next couple of years, he would be given the keys to Ring of Honor, which is, around when we started tuning out. I've never been a huge fan of the guy, but it's interesting to see him and Omega very unformed, so unformed. I don't expect you to recognize everybody like that because you haven't seen so much wrestling, and we haven't watched a lot of Rollins, but he's just largely unformed, and he would become a much bigger star.
It's crazy to me that already at that time, this is almost at the end of Gabe Sapolsky's tenure as Booker of Ring of Honor. Already at that point, Gabe wanted to put the title on Tyler and push him to the moon. And he's clearly not ready for that in this match.
I honestly,
not that he ever really was.
Well, I honestly think if they were going to give him the title, it would have done him a lot more favors if they went with him early before he was ready and see if he could rise to the occasion, as opposed to what they did, which was keep the title away from him for like another almost 2 years until it was way too late before he finally won the damn thing. I
do see your point in that, like, I up until now, the 3-person matches I've seen have largely been like exceptional 3-person matches.
Yeah.
I now really do see your point about the pitfalls of a 3-person match, because, whoever wins, it's going to be sort of compromised, right? Because it's like, there are too many opportunities for 2 people to gang up on one guy. And while it can be interesting to see, like, like a brief alliance and then that falls apart and then it doesn't, you do kind of come away feeling like you don't really know who's actually the better wrestler.
Though I'd say in this match, it's pretty clear that Danielson dominates both of them when it comes down to it.
The double cattle mutilation he does at the beginning is pretty fucking impressive. Like,
at the same time, it was also kind of a funny story. Like, so we don't quite, in this video that's on YouTube, we don't quite see the very beginning, I think, where I think Black wanted to team up with Omega, and Omega denies him at first. And then later on, once he realizes that they're way outmatched by Bryan Danielson, is like, no, actually, let's try teaming up. And at one point he goes, New Age of the Fall, baby.
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
The Age of the Fall was Tyler Black's stable at the time with Jimmy Jacobs and Necro Butcher. And so Omega's like, yeah, I'm going to be in your team. And Black's just kind of like, no, man.
They were like I don't want to say like a goth stable. It was like a mid-2000s. They were more of like a dark emo stable. Their formation was one of the most memorable things in Ring of Honor history. I remember it's like, they take out Jay Briscoe, and who bladed and hit a gusher. He was bleeding like you wouldn't believe. And then they hang him from the ceiling by his foot. So he's dangling upside down over the ring, pouring blood onto the ring. And then Jimmy Jacobs, the leader of it, stood like directly under him with blood pouring onto him and cut his promo about the formation of the Age of the Fall. And it's like, that was pretty sick. Yeah. I can't say it wasn't.
Before that, what preceded that was like a really cool, scary kind of viral campaign. What was the message?
I don't know.
Fuck. But it was really a cool thing, and then they turned out to just be not that interesting after that initial segment.
I couldn't follow it up. We're going to have to look that up. Yeah. It's okay. Hey, we won't say it on the air. That's pure viral campaign. You figure it out.
So I two observations. One, I don't know if this is at all accurate or not, but this ring looks a little bouncier than rings normally are.
Most likely. The WWE has bouncier rings, and we've primarily watched that. They have bouncier rings than they used to have. Like, if you watch a lot of wrestling from the 80s, the ring is like rock solid, so it doesn't look bouncy on television. Indie rings will generally have a little more give to them because the guys are just bouncing more on them.
Sure.
Project 161.
I guess we will say it on the air. Yeah, Project 161, right, and it was the 161st Ring of Honor show. I remember that now. It's coming back. But yeah, you're not wrong. The ring was definitely a bit bouncier.
Okay.
It makes it easier to take bumps on, but it actually makes it harder to run across. It's not so good for your knees.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I have a contentious history with wrestling announcers or something, and these announcers are so completely in like what I think of as like the baseball radio style, where they're just telling you what happened.
It's Prazak and Leonard at this point, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And it's he's just describing the moves as they're happening, and I'm like, nobody's listening to everybody's watching the match. We all can see what's happening.
This is not a match where you need somebody to be explaining the story to you.
I think they were I think that's exactly what they were going for. In contrast to the WWE announcers, Ring of Honor was still trying to present themselves as somewhat more sports-like and like realistic than WWE. So I think that was intentional.
Yeah, but it wasn't very good.
No, never liked it.
Well, they're trying to be Jim Ross, but Jim Ross knows how to get the emotion of a story forward. And like Jim Ross has said a bunch of days, wrote it in his book, and he said it in a bunch of interviews. When he first started announcing, he was imitating his idol, Gordon Solie. He was one of the most prolific wrestling announcers of all time. I go on about Gordon Solie, but the point is he did that once or twice, and Bill Watts, the promoter, came up to Jim Ross and said, look, if I wanted Gordon Solie, I have his number. I could hire Gordon Solie. I want you got to be you. And he went, okay. And he stopped imitating and started taking what he learned from his favorite announcer and utilizing it. And that's the problem with these announcers, is that they're kind of being a tribute act to the straight announcers of wrestling. And it comes off as nothing, because the real story of a wrestling match is the emotion. And that's what an announcer can help put forward, not just, like you said, baseball announcing.
Well, listen, I've definitely learned that, like, when I started when we started this and I was starting to watch wrestling for the first time, I kind of went in assuming that I would be more into the entertainment side of sports entertainment. And I've really learned that, like, the two sides have to have, like, a deeply intertwined relationship. And really, what makes wrestling appealing is the interplay between the sports/athletic side and the entertainment side. But I do think that the framing of wrestling has to be entertainment, because when it is framed as purely as a sport, when it is framed like just as an athletic contest, then the entertainment side almost seems like an interloper, right? It makes it seem weird. Whereas when it's framed as entertainment, and when it's framed with like the stories and the emotion and the psychology, to me that then really makes the sports side and the athletic side of it that much more interesting.
I think it really depends. I was just recently watching a match that we might eventually watch for this podcast from Josh Barnett's Bloodsport. And Josh Barnett is an MMA guy who's done some pro wrestling in Japan, and there's a match between him and Minoru Suzuki, and they're going for pure sports in their presentation. And they try to make it as realistic as possible. All the moves are like real MMA holds and counters and stuff like that. And then at a certain point, the match builds up to where they're kind of doing spots. But I thought it was actually really effective, done in this very specific way.
I have a counter to that, though. Josh Barnett's Bloodsport is very specifically, like, it's only 1 or 2 shows a year. And it's very specifically the professional wrestling show done by the guy who does MMA. He is presenting it as entertainment. But it's more like you're going to see Bloodsport, the movie, which is presented as a sports tournament that everyone is taking very seriously, as opposed to, like, if you see Joey Janela's Spring Break and you see two invisible, well, you don't see, but there's two invisible men wrestling. This has pissed off a bunch of the indie workers on my feed. He just signed the 2 guys in the viral videos with the guys wrestling at Walmart to appear at Spring Break, and people are like, well, I'm just going to wrestle at some other fast food restaurant. I'm like, well, I don't know, maybe you make a series of videos that are entertaining enough that it organically goes around the internet, and then you'll get signed, because you're missing the point. You can continue to you get the same thing with bands. People are like, well, we're solid. It's like, well, what have you done to get people's attention? It's attention. Like, snap. Attention is what you need to grab, not just be good. There's a million guys that are good. What do you actually bring to the table?
I will say on the topic of the relationship between sports and entertainment. What makes Jean-Claude Van Damme's Bloodsport a true masterpiece is, like, up until the very end of the movie, it's just a very entertaining, like, martial arts fantasy movie. And then after the movie's done and the words "based on a true story" come up, that is when it elevates that entire movie into the realm of just of something beyond.
And it's better to see it after the movie too. It's like, the illusion of it's the opposite of, like, the Blair Witch Project, where they presented at the film festival to, like, awkward silence, and then the stars come up on stage and everyone's like, what? It's like, it's a movie about a witch in the forest. You thought that was real? I guess we're better than we thought we were. Let's make an awful sequel.
It's like if at the end of Highlander, it was just like, this movie is dedicated to all the real Highlanders who have been murdered over the centuries in the quest for the prize.
Yeah, man.
So speaking of some of the more entertainment style stuff, in this match, Kenny Omega does a couple of his little gimmicky tropes that he's since shed. But we see them there. The stop sign enziguri, when the guy's coming at him and he yells stop, and the guy stops, and then he hits him with an enziguri.
I was wondering about that.
Which works the first time on Danielson.
Right.
The second time he tries it, Danielson just grabs his arm and puts him into the Danielson special, which
Danielson
is the
special.
it's a double underhook suplex, a butterfly suplex into an armbar.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And then Omega bridges out of that, and Danielson transitions into a different armbar because he can just do that.
Well, part of the brilliance of Omega is that, like, he used to do all that wacky stuff that, like, doesn't make sense if you really look at it logically. It was still great. I'm not knocking him for it. Today, he doesn't do much of that because what he's trying to play in his character today is the serious top-tier main event wrestler who had his phase where he had a lot of fun, and now he's trying to be the best, which is a great, like, narrative long-term thing if you follow his career.
I mean, I guess the first time someone just yells stop at you in a match, you might stop.
Yeah. Colt Cabana used to do it.
I mean, I think that's just like an instinctive thing, or like you're going to be worried, like, oh no, is this guy really hurt, or so,
Yeah.
you know? Like,
Are you going to give up? Did you break your ankle and we haven't noticed yet? Because as soon as you move, you're going to fall over. Like, that happens.
yeah.
And then in the finish, he goes for his Hadouken, and Danielson's just like, fuck this, and hits him with a rolling elbow.
Yeah.
And then a bunch of other elbows that bust him open, and then finally beats him with the cattle mutilation.
The Danielson elbow spot was always so brutal looking.
The MMA elbows, as they would call them. He was the
Right.
first guy to be like, oh, I'm just going to hold him like sometimes happens in MMA if you can get your opponent into that kind of position, and just keep elbowing him in the face until he's knocked out or he taps out or the ref just stops the match because, he's not fighting back.
In an MMA fight, usually if something like that happens, the ref will stop it after 2 or 3 hits. It's the ref's job specifically to make sure that the level of violence is actually minimized. As soon as it's over, and everything else is just assault.
This wasn't the case when UFC first started.
No.
If you see their first couple of tournaments,
Oh my God.
people just get their faces bashed in.
Yeah.
So in the very first one, they didn't even have it as a rule that you couldn't kick someone in the balls. So in one of the fights, a guy gets into a position where his opponent's balls are wide open, and he just starts going to town, punching him over and over again in the groin, and the other guy wasn't giving up or anything. So in the second one, they adjusted the very few rules to include, I think it was no biting and no kicking in the balls. They have since added a lot more rules.
there were a lot of things that were great about the original UFC. One of them was that MMA as a style hadn't really been developed yet. So the original UFC tournaments were kind of like Bloodsport, where it was all different styles. And you got to see, how would the Kung Fu guy match up against the wrestler? And then it turned out that the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys just beat everyone.
Well, I remember listening to an interview with legendary internet comedy personality Sean Baby, who is also like very deeply involved in MMA.
I just joined the Patreon for his new comedy website.
Oh, no way.
1-900 Hot Dogs. I read the sample and I was like, I'll pay $5 a month for 7 art. It's him and Brockaway.
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
all right. Yeah,
it's-
I'm in.
You can,
I'm
you
in.
can. I think it's like $3 a month for 3 articles a week, and
Okay.
like 5 for. I'm not advertising. They're not paying me, although
Yeah,
they
they're
could.
not-
But
they're-
like, yeah, it's like 1-900 Hot Dogs. They're great, and like, yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. Go on, Sean.
No,
Baby,
it's good.
yeah.
So, and he was talking about how, like, in the early days of MMA, they sort of kept wondering, like, is like a Jeet Kune Do guy going to show up and just dominate? Is some like Tai Chi master going to come down off a mountain and just rule everybody? And then just like the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys just fucking dominated everybody. And it's sort of like almost disproved all of these classic martial arts, which is like, it's not to say that there's no value in doing Aikido, like, or anything, or no value in doing like, like traditional judo or
Doing
anything.
martial arts is great for you.
Yeah, exactly. But that, like, in terms of, like, at least in this very, very specific controlled context, not necessarily in all fights that you could ever have in the street or whatever, but in this specific context, there were just 1 or 2 styles that was, like, going to, because even now they call it mixed martial arts, but it's basically just Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai, right? From what I understand.
For the most part, you need some kind of wrestling background, whether it's jiu-jitsu or like traditional wrestling. And I mean, the more styles you can incorporate,
Sure.
the better. But yeah,
It has very much mixed by now. Anything that works stays, and anything that doesn't work doesn't.
I do remember seeing a very early MMA match between like somebody who I don't know, knew a bunch of actual fighting styles, and then a guy who was like a Taekwondo master or something, and you can take a guess who won that.
So a couple other things for this match. I remember, Evan, I think it was in the Okada Omega match, you were impressed by the move where the one guy's laying on top of the other in a pin and he bridges up out of it.
Saw that in this one.
In this match, the one cool thing that Tyler Black does is Danielson is bridging out of the move with Omega, and Tyler Black does a Quebrada moonsault off the second rope onto both of them.
Yeah.
That was cool.
One more thing I want to say about martial arts, as long as we got on before we get out. I was just looking up this, so I got the exact thing. There was a YouTube guy named Super Eye Patch Wolf, who's also done some interesting stuff about wrestling. And he put out a video that I watched recently called The Bizarre World of Fake Martial Arts. And it's half-hour long. I'm going to send it to you guys.
YouTube was telling me to watch that. Was recommending that to me.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
It's like the first half of it, he talks about like the kind of martial arts styles they used to sell out of comic books, like, death, pressure, touch stuff, which doesn't exist. And then he talks about like people who have the kind of form where you just point at somebody and they fall over, which again, like that's bullshit. But people flock to these gyms and the students play along and it's very kayfabe, He talks about pro wrestling a little bit. But that's not really the point. Everyone knows what pro wrestling is.
Yeah.
But then, and this is the really interesting part that, Evan, I think you'll find.
Like some ninjutsu gyms that popped up in the 90s.
Right. Teaching turtle style, right?
There's still a couple of those in the city, I think.
But you'll find this very interesting. There's one guy who's a mixed martial arts practitioner in China who started challenging top-level individual martial arts guys, like the grand masters of the traditional Chinese martial arts. And martial arts are great to do. The guy who made this video loves martial arts. But in China, where they're from, like the grand masters are considered basically deities. And he started challenging them to fights, and they all accept. They're like, oh, no, my fighting style, of my version of karate is the greatest fighting style in the world. And so they get in a ring or whatever, and this guy just beats the crap out of them because he knows how to actually fight instead of knowing how to do a bunch of katas. Or, and this is a thing in competitive martial arts, every individual martial art is an individual game that you learn the specific rules to. But if somebody can just do whatever they want. So he's beating all of these guys, and the Chinese government hates him. Every time he beats one of these guys, they lower his social score, which they have now, to the point where he has trouble renting an apartment. He can't fly to and from his fights. He has to take trains, and he has to take low-level trains because his social score by the government keeps going down. But he keeps doing it. His family is being threatened, like all of this horrible stuff that you get living under the kind of regime that they have in China. But he's been disproving all of this stuff because, like, once again, I'm not saying there's not worth in martial arts. Great for discipline, great for the body. Any, like, real martial arts master will kind of tell you, you don't actually want to get in a fight. Like, learning how to do this is about confidence. And if you're confident enough, you're not going to throw a punch at somebody. Oh, yeah. What are you doing?
When I was a kid and I was taking Taekwondo, and I was like a very insecure, like fat kid who got bullied and stuff. In elementary school, the one time I had, in elementary I had like the two closest things I ever got to an actual fight. One was in 5th grade and one was in middle school in 6th grade. In 5th grade, I just kicked the kid in the balls finally.
Yeah.
And that wasn't, I didn't need really Taekwondo for that. I guess I could snap the kick better. And then in 6th grade, this kid who was a lot larger than me, whose dad was in the military, punched me directly in the face. And I had this moment of like, oh no, like I can't fight this guy. Like I'm not good at fight. He's better at fighting than me. And so I bit my own lip and started bleeding. And then I was just like, and he was like, whoa, man. Okay.
Mike Tyson famously said, everybody's got a plan till they get punched in the mouth.
But acting crazy is probably the best form of self-defense for someone who can't actually fight.
Or running away. Like I know people who teach self-defense, and they're like, the first thing you need to learn how to do is if you can just get away. And it's like, oh, but can I win? No. Yeah. Get out of that situation.
Like Michael Jackson said, just beat it.
Just beat it. No one wants to be defeated.
If I had run, this kid definitely would have caught me and beat the shit out of me. You're gonna ask me to cut that, and so I'll just tell you right now I'm gonna do it. You're definitely gonna put that in the Slack later, like, hey, you know what? In retrospect,
I thought I was making up for even mentioning Michael Jackson.
I think you can keep in the reference to the song lyric.
Yes.
Like that was actually clever.
yes, yeah.
Yes. My physics teacher in high school is like famed physician Paula Abdul said, opposites attract, which a couple people laughed, but by then it was too late.
I mean, she just got in a lot of trouble for fucking the cartoon wolf, but
Jesus, yeah.
And then hentai. All right, so let's move on.
Speaking of hentai, Kenny Omega.
Boom, bringing it back.
Yeah.
I love in the match. One other thing about how great Bryan Danielson is, or the crowd started. One guy is like, "Dragon's overrated," and the whole rest of the crowd boos.
That's great.
He could do no wrong. We loved him so much.
No wrong. All right, so moving on, the Golden Lovers, right?
Yes, the Golden Lovers.
Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi.
So
yes.
right away, I'm gonna say I know that it's it's supposed to be ambiguous.
Yeah.
Kind of their whole relationship. Like, are they lovers? Do they love each other platonically?
They were initially going to be the Golden Brothers, and they were like, "How about we be the Golden Lovers?" Yeah.
Right away, the narrative possibilities opened up by having that kind of relationship. It's just night and day. Like, and it occurs like, there are a lot of reasons that the entrenched homophobia in wrestling is a terrible thing that we should move past. And, I would say reasons 1 through 99 all are, like, moral reasons. But then, like, way down the list, just the storytelling possibilities of having... Because I was, like, especially, watching the match between Omega and Ibushi was just this, like, I've never seen a wrestling match between two men with this kind of undergirding of like tension.
Yeah.
And it was fucking incredible.
Yeah, I remember the first time I saw Joey Janela and Penelope Ford team up when everybody knew they were dating.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's like also having a tag team partner where you know that they're fucking, like it adds a whole new dimension to like saving them and protecting them. Definitely those narrative possibilities.
That same YouTube guy who did the fake martial arts video did a video about pro wrestling, and the last 10 minutes of it is like, well, it's about storytelling in wrestling, and the last 10 minutes of it is, well, let me tell you the story of the Golden Lovers. And I'll send that to you, and I'll put it in Slack. And we got a Slack this week. It's nice.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for motivating.
Yeah, no problem. You wanted it, we got it. It's not that hard. We got it happening.
Speaking of which, a lot of the information we have about this storyline, as people who didn't really follow it that closely as it was going on, was by someone named Laura Morrow, who was writing on DDT Daily. It's a blog about the promotion DDT, Dramatic Dream Team. So she has a really great article that was in the lead up to one of the matches that we're talking about, which is the B block final. So the semifinal for the whole tournament of the G1 Climax, which is an annual tournament that New Japan Pro Wrestling puts on. This is the one from 2018, and that's the match between Kenny Omega and Kota Ibushi. It's Golden Lovers.
A giant month-long round-robin tournament where, like, every show, everybody is encouraged to have the best match they possibly can every night. And afterwards, everyone gets kind of a vacation.
So the whole storyline leading up to that match is... So Omega, as we talked about in the main feed episode, went to Japan specifically to work for DDT and work with Kota Ibushi. And there, they had one match against each other, I think, that Ibushi won. They worked together a lot. Eventually, Ibushi started to get more work with New Japan, and Omega followed him to New Japan. There, Omega joined the Bullet Club, turned heel, rose to the top of the Bullet Club, became their leader and the leader of the Elite. Meanwhile, Ibushi was working his way up the card as well. They had both been junior heavyweights, but eventually transitioned to heavyweight. And so now they're really starting to be kind of both top heavyweights at the time. And Omega's got his boys in the Bullet Club. Meanwhile, Cody Rhodes comes to New Japan and joins the Bullet Club. And we get this storyline that's really a battle for control of the Bullet Club between Cody and Omega. But it also revolves around Omega's relationship with Ibushi. Because there's this moment where the Bullet Club start to beat down Ibushi and Omega saves him. And Omega and Ibushi hadn't interacted in New Japan very much, besides one singles match in 2012, where Ibushi was the only guy ever to kick out of the One-Winged Angel.
The fans knew, though.
The fans knew. So this moment where Omega saves Ibushi is a big deal, and it creates this tension between Cody and Omega, eventually causing Omega to, at least temporarily, leave the Bullet Club and feud with his other dear friends, the Young Bucks. So the first match in this story that we're talking about is from the New Japan Strong Style Evolved show in Long Beach, California, which was earlier in 2018. And it's Omega and Ibushi, the newly reformed Golden Lovers, taking on the Young Bucks, Nick and Matt Jackson, who themselves had just moved up to the heavyweight tag team division from the junior tag team division. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this matchup.
And it's especially interesting to see because, you know, they, Omega and Ibushi have this whole complex relationship. And while the Young Bucks don't have quite as much of it, they also clearly still have, like, this very deep chemistry between the two of them.
Oh, yeah.
That makes it interesting. I fucking tried so hard, but I maintain my position. Like, wrestling matches should not be this long.
I think this one was too long.
It was such a fucking drain by the end. It's like, no matter how good it was, like after 35 minutes, and I'm looking at the fucking thing, I'm like, I have another 25 minutes in this match.
You gotta put it in context though, where this was a New Japan show in Long Beach, California. I think possibly one of the first New Japan shows in that market, and this was the main event. So these were people, a crowd who had been dying to see New Japan for years, was finally getting a taste of it, and this was the main event of that show.
This is PWG country, too, and the biggest stars in PWG were the Bucks.
Oh, yeah.
And so this was the biggest show they'd been on, too. So the people that were there wanted, like, a match of this magnitude, but no, you're right, it was too long. They could have told the same story, like, and cut 15 minutes out of it. I mean, I'm not a Bucks hater, but I do think they're a bit overrated. After all these years, I'm still not sure which one of them is which. They're brothers, Nick Jackson and Matt Jackson.
Matt's the brunette, Nick's the blonde.
I mean, I know that kind of, but it never sticks. That's
actually,
okay because they're such a tag team. They never have singles matches.
Though this match actually was the first time where I realized that while I think Nick might be the better athlete of the two, Matt really has more charisma and more personality.
This is true.
His interactions with Kenny Omega carry this match in a lot of ways, I think. So Matt, I think he had a legit back injury at the time, but they're at least playing up his back injury. And so the work around Matt's back injury is really interesting in this match where like Ibushi's going right after it and attacking the back viciously. And at first Omega's like, yo, take it easy on him. Like, because Omega, even though he's having this falling out with the Bucks, still cares about them.
It's not the usual wrestling heel face turn dynamic where as soon as somebody turns, they hate everyone and love everyone else.
But then Matt is like, no, don't take it easy on me.
Yeah.
It felt like there was a little more in-ring plot in this match than I'm used to seeing, and that was really great, actually, and I really enjoyed that. And I guess, you know, I can't say that, like, categorically no wrestling match should be this long. Like, if that's what the fans want, that's what the fans want. Two of my favorite kinds of music are progressive rock and classical music.
Right.
Like, you know, obviously, like, if there's something you really love and you're like that much of a nerd for, you'll listen to the whole thing. And honestly, there's a lot of my favorite pieces of classical music. I'm like, this could have used some editing. They could have chopped a solid 10, 15 minutes out of this.
There's also a difference between going to see a symphony live and taking in that whole visceral experience versus listening to it at home.
Right. Yeah.
Like the WWE never has matches this long. They might have a match that goes longer than 35 minutes. I would say once a year, but really less than once a year, unless other than like the Royal Rumble or occasionally an Elimination Chamber match that doesn't really start going until 25 minutes in.
Yeah.
But in terms of like matches like this, they never go this long because they know people don't like it. One time they had a match on Raw go like over an hour, and they made like a big deal out of it during it. They were like, we had other matches that were cutting from the card. These two guys are just still going. It was like John Cena and Shawn Michaels too.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
like it wasn't just some match. And then finally at like an hour and 3 minutes, Shawn does his spot that he only did once in a great while, where he super kicks John Cena, and then they both collapse and he falls on him and pins him motionless, which, you know, it's a great spot, except Dolph Ziggler does it in every match he does, which makes it completely meaningless, and that's my bitch for the week.
Yeah, we see a spot kind of like that at the end of the Ibushi Omega match.
Yeah. There's a lot of emotion in that.
There was also that gauntlet match that was, I think, possibly Seth Rollins' best performance ever.
Yes.
On Raw. That was, I think, technically the longest Raw match ever.
But that was also, it was mentioned recently. Where did I hear it? I think on one of the Conrad Thompson podcasts. He mentions that that's the longest match in WWF history, going all the way back to, I think it was Bruno Sammartino and Pedro Morales wrestled to a draw after like 95 minutes in a babyface match in the 70s. But even that match was a gauntlet match, so every like 20 minutes a new opponent came out, so it was a different thing. Right, so yeah, this match was great, but no, it's too long. Yeah, sometimes, yeah. And I understand what you mean about classical music, sure. But man, you don't need it. You just don't need it.
But going back to the Matt Jackson's back thing,
yeah.
There's later in the match, Omega finally decides, like, screw this guy. I'm gonna attack him with everything, and he's stomping on his back. And Matt is yelling back at him, "How's it feel, Kenny?
Right.
How's it feel to beat up your friend?" That's
That
a
was
dynamic
great.
I've never seen before
Totally,
in a match.
totally.
And Matt Jackson comes off as such a manipulative dick by doing it, doesn't he?
If they had done all of the same cool things they did in this match and just compressed it down to 35 minutes, it would have been like fucking great.
Agreed.
Which on that. Unless you have more to say about this match.
Well, there's a little more. I think it's cool that moment where Matt Jackson could jump into the ring to hit Omega or jump onto Ibushi on the table.
Yeah.
And his indecision over doing that ends up costing him.
It's a good psychological point. I liked when the Bucks went up to do Omega and Ibushi's like double 450 splash or whatever.
Their version of more bang for your buck,
right?
Which is the Young Bucks finisher.
But
one of them.
I heard the announcers talk about it, and like one thing that we really shouldn't leave unsaid is that move when Omega and Ibushi do it is called the Golden Shower. Because they're the golden lovers and they're showering onto you and no other reason.
That's it.
That's all that connotes.
You can hear the Japanese announcers like, "Oh, the golden shower." And like, I'm glad that got through. I always like it when something subversive slips through that. It's much better than when somebody just does it overtly.
I wonder how many people on the Japanese side of the equation know what that means, or I wonder if Kenny Omega said to Ibushi hey, here's the funny, it's like a funny double entendre.
One day I'm gonna do the opposite. I'm gonna start a punk band in the U.S. called Iku Iku. People can look that up to find out what that means in Japanese. So in the end, playing again into this whole dynamic between Omega and Matt Jackson, he picks him up for the one-winged angel.
Yeah.
And for a second, he hesitates because he's like, oh, man, his back is so bad. I could totally cripple him with this move. And Matt demands that he hits him with it. He's like, no, Kenny, give it to me. And then he finally does, and that ends the match. Then at the end, Cody comes out and is disappointed in the Bucks for losing and berates them, and then Omega comes to their rescue, and then they're all back together. And eventually the Bullet Club reformed, even with Cody, and that was the whole crew that ended up leaving to form AEW.
Sure.
The whole time all this is happening, Tamatonga's in the back. None of y'all are really Bullet Club. Shut up. Oh, you're leaving? Yeah, good. Go away. I'm the Bullet Club. I've been into... God damn it. Yeah, Tamatonga's cool. I like that.
But as
Gorillas of Destiny, him and his brother as a tag team. The G.O.D.
The Gorillas of Destiny.
Guerrillas of Destiny.
Oh, okay.
The Guerrillas of... Still good.
I mean, that's still really good, but there was something that was really amusing to me about the concept of
Tamatonga and his brother Tangaloa, who was Camacho in the WWE. He got wasted in the WWE like they do with so many promising talents.
The Sons of Haku.
The sons of King Haku, yes.
But as Doc was alluding to earlier, what's really cool about this whole story is that it didn't follow the normal trajectory of the teams. You know, there's trouble between them, there's dissension in the team, and then they end up breaking up and one becomes a babyface and one becomes a heel. No, like in real family or friendship squabbles, it's complicated, and they actually ended up working it out eventually.
Yeah. So yeah, we can move on now, I think.
All right.
So moving on, yes, to the Ibushi Omega showdown. And this is now the third singles match they've ever had and the last one. Because after the Elite left, Ibushi stayed. And so this is so far the last chapter in the Ibushi Omega rivalry.
Any chance that Ibushi is going to show up in AEW?
You never know. You never know. Never say never. Everyone says when they sign a contract, "Oh, I'm here forever," but you know,
the backstage gossip is that they've had a falling out in real life over all of this. But who knows? In wrestling, who knows?
So I'll definitely say, all right, if you're keeping track, for those of you keeping track at home, once again, I have a hard time ranking things. It's hard for me to say, oh, this one thing is my number one, this is my number two. But I would say we have covered 3 matches throughout the course of this podcast that I could call my favorite. One was Eddie Ray, Halloween Havoc 97. One was the triple threat between Samoa Joe, Christopher Daniels, and AJ Styles at a TNA some kind of something.
Unbreakable 05.
Yeah, thank you. And then this one. This is, I mean, it's like perfect length. 35 minutes, wall-to-wall, fucking masterpiece. Their whole complex relationship playing out. Just, like, amazing athleticism, technical stuff. There's a rise and a fall. I don't really have a ton of notes about this because I was just too enraptured in the match to stop and keep a lot of notes.
Hey, just for the record, did you watch it with English commentary or Japanese?
So, while I enjoy the Japanese commentary more, I have taken to watching the NJPW matches in English just because since I don't know that much about stuff, I want to make sure I'm not missing anything, if the announcers are going to fill in any kind of backstory or stuff like that. So I did watch this I've been watching them with the English commentary.
That's exactly what it's for, I think.
Yeah.
So I've been specifically watching it for the English commentary as to not miss out on like details that they might provide, feeling that it's like both me and Doc's responsibility to like know all of the context. Whereas I think for you, I would sort of rather that you just experience it, you know, with the Japanese commentary, which is a better experience.
Yes,
I think,
no,
overall.
I would concur that it is a more emotional experience watching it with the Japanese commentary.
I think you should do whatever's making you comfortable. They're both. I mean, they're different experiences. The pure Puro thing, like back in the day, was you have to trade grainy VHS tapes and everything would just sort of be in Japanese. But there's a reason NJPW has English commentary now, and a lot of it is exactly what you just said. It's to catch people up, because if you don't know what's going on, you're not going to get into a league.
Especially with something like this, where I felt like. Because if it was just like a match between 2 wrestlers that like I wasn't necessarily as involved in the story or something, I would have picked Japanese stuff. But because this is such a complex relationship,
right?
I felt like it would add more watching it.
If you happen to ever watch a lot of Japanese wrestling, you'll switch to Japanese. But until then, that's a long conversation. I think it's a debate. It's the same. It's almost the same thing as like anime people will argue over like subtitles versus dubbing, and like the subtitles people are louder, but most people don't want to read a lot of lines especially if they're not way into the genre, you know.
And especially in that genre, in anime, it always seems kind of strange to me because it's not like the dubbing. It's not like watching like, you know, old Godzilla movies where there's dubbing from actors who like could give a shit. Like if you're watching it dubbed anime. And I'm not coming down on one side or the other. You should watch whatever your preference is. Sure. But if you're watching dubbed anime, you're watching it being with performances from voice actors who that is what they do. Yeah. They dub anime, and they tend to be really good at it.
I think it comes from much the same place that the old tape trader thing happened. Back in the day, if you got an anime dub, it was probably dubbed by some guy that just wanted it to be dubbed, and it was awful. That's not true anymore. Just not true.
Yeah. I
Anyway.
also don't watch a ton of anime, so
neither do I.
my opinions should not really be that valued on that topic. But
Kenny Omega does watch a ton of
Yes.
anime.
Oh,
Yes,
yes.
he does.
Oh, yes, and plays a lot of video games.
Yeah, and he specifically talked about it in a recent interview how he doesn't watch a ton of wrestling these days.
Yeah.
And that
I bet
his-
you a lot of it bores him.
Yeah, his approach to storytelling is coming from his other influences.
Yeah.
And that's really what makes his matches so different from everyone else's, I think.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid reading interviews with like some of my favorite musicians, and it was like, oh, well, what do you listen to? And they'd list a bunch of stuff that had absolutely nothing to do with their band or anything that I would listen to. And it's like, and I know my first reaction as 16 years old was like, this is bullshit. But then I thought about it, and even like by a year or two later, I was like, oh no, that makes sense. You're not trying, the best ones too, because it's like, oh, you're not trying to imitate the pack. You have your own thing, and then the pack will imitate you.
The first time I ever actively sought out and listened to the music of Prince was on the advice of Ishan from Emperor.
Right, yeah. It's like, are you into the most hardcore stuff ever? Like, yes, Prince.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? He's like, have you ever listened? It's like, no. It's like, yeah, and that's why you're not an emperor.
It's like, you don't listen to black metal? It's like, well, I make the best black metal, so why would I need to listen to the other black metal? He didn't say that. I'm just imagining that's what's happening in his brain.
He's right. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's what makes him like David Bowie was really into chanson, like this like French lounge pop or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
It's like that's why he sounded different from everyone else.
He said that Bowie's last record, Black Star, which is probably at this point my favorite Bowie album that was made. He said he was like mostly listening to Kendrick Lamar and making his producer listen to Kendrick Lamar all the time.
Yeah, like, no, this is good.
Yeah.
Trust me.
So back to Omega Ibushi.
Yes.
I mean, we could go on forever talking about all the moves. There's a lot of moves.
Yeah.
There's a lot of moves.
One that really stands out for me is Ibushi does this moonsault double knee drop onto Omega, which I think the first person I ever saw do that was Frightmare in Chikara.
Oh, yeah, the kneecalepsy.
The kneecalepsy, yes.
That's what he calls it, Frightmare.
And then Alexa Bliss does a kind of version of it.
Yeah.
That's a good knee pun, not
Yeah, it is.
fucking Billy Gunn's stupid high knee.
Oh, that was a Brutus Beefcake. But yes,
Brutus
you're
Beef-
right.
yeah,
The
sorry,
high
yeah.
knee. Well, Frightmare's a better wrestler than Brutus Beefcake.
So, but whenever I've seen Frightmare, I mean, first of all, Frightmare and Alexa Bliss are both much smaller than Kota Ibushi.
Yes.
And whenever I've seen them do that move, it's always rather controlled. You can see, they're not coming down with their full weight right on the person's abdomen. Ibushi, on the other hand, and this is something you can get away with when you're in the ring with your best friend and lover, is he just goes for it completely and crushes. I mean, thankfully, Omega has a very well-developed abdomen, and he can take it. But man, does he! And it's like the point of his knees too. It's as devastating as that move could possibly.
Oh, yeah,
be.
you hit your friends harder, for sure.
There's a moment towards the end of the match where Omega kicks out after some sort of devastating move, and the ref, who's been counts 1, 2, and then Omega kicks out, and the ref just like collapses in like tragedy. It's like, no, how could this keep going?
That's that Red Shoes Uno.
Oh,
so
Red
good.
Shoes, yes.
Have you noticed also with the Japanese referees, the third count there's a hesitation before the third count. It's not just 1, 2, 3. It's 1, 2, 3.
No, I assumed that was just that's just how you count.
It's
right?
a
Isn't that always-
psychology thing in Japan. That's in America, an even count is much more, let's say, prized. We don't have Katie on this episode, but I think an even count is much more prized. There is still psychology to it. If you watch like old matches that Earl Hebner refs, he'll do like a very slow and even count, and then sometimes for the finish, just for the finish, he'll do not a fast count that's weird, but a faster count to like rev it up and pop the crowd.
But here, like adding that hesitation before the third count really adds a lot more drama to the near falls.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I would say like I would honestly recommend, if you're somebody who is listening to this who's kind of more on my side of things, where like you're not coming with this huge knowledge of wrestling, and you're sort of like on the fence about whether you really like this or not, go watch this match. Go watch this match with the context of Ibushi and Omega and their history. And it's just, I was just really impressed and really entertained. And dare I say, moved.
Good. You can find this match on the NJPW World app and website. It's kind of New Japan's answer to the WWE Network. It has an English option because you go to NJPWWorld.com and it's in Japanese. But there's a button on top that's like English, and just click the English.
Which is somewhat helpful.
Well, yes.
It is,
It really
it is not the most well laid out library as things go, but you can. I have been able to eventually find everything. Yeah.
$7.99 a month.
I'm not sure.
Like that. I'm using someone else's account.
Yeah.
That we're all sharing. Thanks a lot, Matt. He's going to be on the show soon.
If I was going to start watching wrestling and subscribing to a service regularly, it would be NJPW.
So far, everything we've shown you from NJPW, you've enjoyed. I think you just like the style a lot better.
I like the style a lot better. The only beef I have is too many super long matches. That's
and
really
if you were to watch the shows just as a fan, you'd see that those matches are the exception, but it's those are the notable matches. So that's what we're showing you.
But if you watched a whole show, like one of their big super cards, you would get burnt out.
I'm sure. I'm sure I would.
Oh, Jesus. The
I
Tokyo
get burnt
Dome
out.
is it's 2 6-hour shows now, day by day. And it's like, oh, yeah, right?
One other move that I want to talk about is the Kamegoye. Ibushi's finisher, which in the tag match, Ibushi and Omega do the golden trigger, where they both do this knee strike. But the Ibushi one, it's one of my favorite finishers ever because there's ways to get out of it, but it has a kind of finality to it. You hold the guy by both wrists, so their head is completely exposed, and then just drive the knee straight forward into their head. And after 2 of them, Ibushi finally beats Omega. But it really does have, you feel like he killed him.
Omega's the champion at this point, right?
Yes, Omega's the champion. So I guess the idea is if the champion wins the G1, they get to choose their opponent for Wrestle Kingdom.
I think so, something like that.
Whereas normally whoever wins the G1 challenges the champion at Wrestle Kingdom. But so
the G1 tournament specifically is a good place for the champion to drop a couple of matches because they're not title matches. Then it's like, oh, this guy might be able to beat the champion. This guy might be able to win the title.
Yeah. So hopefully, sometimes when they book it the most dramatically, the person who eventually wins the tournament is someone who did beat the champion during the tournament.
Right.
Now we're not going to tell you how the G1 ended because the final match of this G1, where Ibushi wrestles Hiroshi Tanahashi, is my favorite New Japan match of all time.
Oh wow! Okay,
so we're
it's
gonna watch
even
that
better than this one.
All right,
I love this match.
I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Before we wrap up on this match, I want to talk about the post match.
Well, right before the post match, just the way it ends,
the pre-post match,
the finish,
So, Ibushi hits Omega with the second Kamigoye, and he collapses on top of him in this incredibly intimate way for the pin. It's just they're embracing almost as he's pinning him. And I think, that it was very much in keeping with how their relationship is expressed in the match. And I felt that was kind of a beautiful moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's very true. I don't mean to gloss over that. And the story and the saga of the Golden Lovers, it's just so brilliantly told every time they are near each other in a ring. The post match is often at the end of New Japan shows they'll have a press conference like you would at a sporting event, and it's the two of them sitting on the floor in front of the background. Not talking to reporters, they're just talking to each other, in Japanese. I don't know what they said, but I watched the whole thing. Just watching them just talking. Omega has his belt, and he looked proud of his friend for beating him,
I think there is an interpreter there.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to hear.
Right. I wasn't that interested, I was feeling it, is all it was. And it was clear, okay, now it's over, we can stop fighting. Isn't that great? You beat me. How about that?
It really is cool because they're one of the greatest tag teams ever, I think, just in terms of the story between them, their tag team moves, their matches. But they haven't had a lot of matches. They've had maybe a dozen matches as a tag team. I don't know how many they had in DDT.
I'm not too familiar with the minutia of year to year in DDT. For all we know, they had a couple of runs, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Somebody tell us. Yes.
But yeah, this epic story that's played out over various promotions over a decade, and hopefully will be resumed in the future. And to me, it's kind of the most interesting overarching narrative in all of wrestling right now.
I absolutely could see that. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, this has been the end, or this is the end of our, of this week of Omega. I mean, you still got a mini-sode coming at you on Friday, but this is definitely not the last time we will delve into the work of Kenny Omega.
No, certainly not.
Who is, I'll say, who's, what a fucking Renaissance man. What an amazing job of getting, somebody like me a little more into wrestling.
And this story, actually, the story that we've talked about in this episode has already continued just between Omega and the Bucks in AEW. So at this last AEW pay-per-view, Revolution that just happened, it's Omega and Hangman Adam Page against the Young Bucks. And again, there's still this, interesting dynamic between these friends who are in competition with one another.
Right. Page and Omega were the tag champs. They weren't fighting the Bucks out of malice. The Bucks got a title shot. Yeah, and that's how the stories go.
Alrighty, this has been Contesting Wrestling Premium. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. Hoping to come at you with some cool stuff later in the year. And if you are a big fan, please go to our regular main feed episodes and leave a nice review and and subscribe and tell all of your friends and such. And we really appreciate you. Thank you.